Hello, and welcome once again to the David Messiah YouTube channel, where our watchwords are to teach and to build back up the kingdom of Zion. The topic of this talk today is actually not a talk, it's a notice and warning to brown Esau and the global Indian diaspora. Notice and warning to brown Esau and the global Indian diaspora. And with the term brown Esau, I am indeed suggesting, in juxtaposition with a reference to the global Indian diaspora, I am suggesting, and more than suggesting, I'm asserting that certainly the Brahminist Hindus are of Esau. They are a branch of the Esau or the Edomite family. That's number one. And that's not hard to prove. I'm not going to go, in terms of chapter and verse as to that. I would simply remark that Esau, who was the twin brother of Jacob, that one who has had the dominion these past roughly 2,500 years, closer to 2,627 years, if my arithmetic is correct, starting with the first kingdom of the Gentiles, when Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem, and that took place at 606 BC, December 31st, that dominion that they were given has now come to an end. It was for a time and times and a half a time, and indeed the sort of beginning of the end of that dominion was marked on December 31st, 2021, when Israel laid siege upon Babylon. Israel there in the form of Russia, when Foreign Minister Lavrov laid down the gauntlet there on that day specifically and in particular, which was the anniversary date of when Babylon first laid siege to Jerusalem, 606 BC. And I have dealt with that in an earlier upload on this channel. I won't go into the detail. But that marked the beginning of the end of Esau's dominion. And what I am given to give, and I speak in three capacities. I speak as that David Messiah that Scripture said would be raised up in the latter day. I am that David Messiah. I speak as a servant of the Most High God, and I speak as a Negro, specifically meaning Negro, people who are Negro by original meaning and definition of that word, are people related to the first Nega, who was Nega David, Nega Deod, and those who are of the same tribal root as Nega Deod were called Negroes or Negara or Nagara, and more words like that. So I speak as a Negro who has been subject to the curses and who have suffered at the hand of Esau, certainly these last roughly 400 years of the captivity that was prophesied there in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 and 14, but in fact going further back than that, to that very first invasion of Jerusalem by Babylon. And Esau mixed with all kinds of people. Esau's first wife was a Canaanite, and the Canaanites were of the line of Ham. And that so distressed his mother that he went and he got a second wife, taken from a near relation. He went down into the Arabian Peninsula and married a daughter there of Ishmael. And then he also went down into Egypt and he married an Egyptian, and who were also Hamites. And he also mixed in with the children of Japhet. Esau's grandson Zepho was made king over the Kittim, also called the Romim, and in a sense they were the proto-Romans. And then those Romim went and conquered the other tribes of Japhet in the Isles of the Gentiles. So Esau has been mixed in with all kinds of people, and so those of the bloodline of Esau today come in all colors, from black Edomites, including, for example, the Bedouin tribes, to, of course, white Edomites, for example, those who are today the Amalekites, the Khazar Jews. So it should be no surprise that there should be a group called Brown Esau. And they are the ones who went into the Indian subcontinent. And I've dealt with that in my book, The Appointed Time, the Tarrying and His Faith. And it looks into the origins of the Brahminist Hindus and their Aryan, so to say, origins. And they were party to a program of early colonial sort of invasion, rape, pillage, plunder of other people's lands, to take other people's property, to colonize and to enslave. And they did that. They were there, in fact, for the first Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem. Those Edomites that came up from the south, and that's referred to in Psalms 137, that said, race it to the ground. So rather than help their brethren in the day of their calamity, they were there egging on the invader, and they blocked the escape of those who did try to escape. So they mixed in with Israelite women, Israelite females, and they became camp followers of the Babylonian Empire. And then they did the same thing during the time of the Medo-Persian Empire. They mixed in and upwards with the Medo-Persians, and so lightened in skin color, because the Medes were a Gentile, Japhetic race of people. And then they did the same with the Greeks during the time of the Greek Empire. They mixed in with the Greeks and lightened further. And the Greeks, of course, went down into the Indian subcontinent, conquered part of it, made a sort of a treaty of peace with the Chandragupta Maurya there in that land. And as part of that treaty of peace, they were specifically permitted to intermarry with the local women, and I think it went also vice versa. They saw benefit in sort of spreading their seed. But because of the sort of, relatively lighter skin color that they had compared with the rest of the original Indian subcontinent, which was populated first, by the way, by Elam, which was a tribe of Shem. They are the forerunners of the Tamil Elamites that are still there in the province of Tamil Nadu, and the Malayalams who were there in that, I think, the Orissa province, I believe. And of course, the Elamites are there also in Sri Lanka. And they're very dark-skinned people. But those Edomites that came in as camp followers of empire were lighter in skin color than the originals. And they were the ones who established that Brahminist caste system that was based on skin color. And under that system, they were the sort of chosen caste, as it were, the Brahmins. And then you had the sort of a skin color differentiation down the totem pole, as it were. And the darkest of the original Indians were put at the bottom. Indeed, some of them were untouchables, meaning they were not even part of that caste structure. Okay, so that's how Brahminist Hinduism, that's how that started. And that became established according to Ambedkar, first president of independent India, who was an untouchable, but he was also a scholar, and I think also a lawyer of some sort. Anyway, in his research, he established that Brahminist Hinduism only became established in the subcontinent around 400 AD, give or take a couple of hundred years. Okay, so that's the origin of the Brahminist Hinduism in India and its relationship to Esau. And that can't be sort of disputed. But even if you do dispute it, I would simply suggest, let's look now at the evidence. I'm speaking here now as a Negro coming from Trinidad. Who have had experience with the Indians that came to Trinidad as part of British colonial enterprise to be indentured laborers after emancipation, Negro emancipation, so that the British would not be subject to the demands that would be made by the newly emancipated Negro slaves. And they would have a sort of a buffer class between them and the Negroes. So they brought in the Indians. I had okay, well, let me see. Let me do a search again. I'm going to give you a quote from one F.E.M. Hossein, who was one of those Indians that were brought to Trinidad. And even though I make reference to the case of Trinidad, the same pattern applies wherever the Indians, under the same kind of British mandate, so to say, were also sent. They were sent to Fiji in the South Pacific. They were sent to South Africa. They were sent to Uganda. They were sent to Kenya. They were sent to Mauritius, and etc. And also in the Caribbean area, they were sent to Guyana and to Suriname. not sure where this thing is here now. It's not coming up how I hoped it would, but anyway, let's try. Just bear with me a little bit. I am not necessarily very good with no, it's not this one. Here we go, FEM Hossein. Right, and so this is the quote that I was looking for. FEM Hossein, one of the leading, and this is the references, a Sunday Express column written by Selvin Ryan, who was a professor at the University of the West Indies. And he was quoting from FEM Hossein. So this was way back in 2013. So let me go here. FEM Hossein, one of the leading Indo-Trinidadian intellectuals of the times, and the first Indian to become a member of the legislative councils, this was around 1925, regarded Africans as an quote-unquote inferior race. In a major address given at a meeting of the East Indian National Congress, that was a political party, back in 1925, the forerunner of the today United National Congress, Hossein, in the presence of the British governor and other prominent officials, had the following to say, and this is a quote: "The Indian was full of his racial prejudices." This is out of his mouth now. "He had heard of the great races of the earth, but among the great sons of the earth, Africa was not mentioned." Where he learned that, I don't know, but he went to Cambridge or Oxford or one of those places. From him, the son of India had nothing to learn, unless perhaps something to ridicule, unquote. And continuing with now Selvin Ryan. Hossein went so far as to boast that the sons of India would eventually overtake and overwhelm the sons of Africa, if one could call them that. As he declared, and here's another quote, this is FEM Hossein now speaking, "If the East Indians showed that progressive increase in number, which they had shown up to now, and taking into account their natural productivity, it was no mere hyperbolical statement that Indians would people the colony and drive out the rest of the inhabitants." Indians would people the colony and drive out the rest of the inhabitants. And here is now my own, because I was writing here as Yoruba Israelite, and I was quoting Selvin Ryan. "The African was not as productive as the East Indians, and if circumstances did not compel him to leave the colony, he would naturally die out." And here is an interesting factoid. Such a thing had taken place in Mauritius, and Trinidad would be maintained and owned by the Indian in the field, the office, and the shop. End of quote. So we see that idea, and it's a racist idea, which F.E.M. Hussain, and he's a Muslim Indian. Okay, that racist idea that the African was inferior, and indeed the Indian would take over wherever they've gone. And certainly in Trinidad, in the field, in the office, in the shop. So in the field and in the shop and in the office, meaning even government. So that idea, that sort of what the lawyers might call mens rea, the sort of mind of the matter, that goes back at least to 1925. Okay, and now to give further legs to it, because this is just an idea, that doesn't mean that, they're kind of all down with that program necessarily. Okay, but we have here, and this took place now because the sort of inheritor of the East Indian National Congress, which is today the United National Congress, and they tried to be inclusive. And so it's no longer the East Indian National Congress, but the sort of that mens rea, that general idea that they would take over, is very much part of what the UNC has been about. And they did have a stint in government, for I think 5 years, from 2010 to 2015, and such was the the abuse of the Treasury, the racial abuse of the Negro that they brought with them into government, that they were next voted out, because they could not be voted in on their own Indian strength. They needed also to have what was called floating voters, that a kind of a coalition involving, in other words, some Negroes also had to vote for them. So they were voted out. And after they were voted out, there was found a document that was being circulated entitled Indian Policy. Of course, it was an anonymous document, but it was being sort of photocopied and circulated, and it sort of made its way into one of the local weekly newspapers, Sunshine newspaper, and here is some of what it said. And I'll start with my own writing here as Yoruba Israelite. I do not and would not make such a charge lightly or vaguely or with muffled whisper. It is not a scurrilous hit-and-run calumny motivated by hate or ill will. It is specific. It is evidence-based. The evidence is actual events unfolding for all to see, along with a smoking gun document, the Indian policy. And this document, as I said, was published in the Sunshine newspaper. Okay, and if you go look for that copy of the newspaper now online, you're not going to find it. It has been scrubbed from the internet. And there was no Indian public intellectual that sort of took note of that document to condemn it. But here are some of the excerpts from that Indian policy document. And as I said, it is evidence based in the sense that the policy is stated and then the evidences of the implementation of that policy. Item 1, make the country ungovernable. What are some of the evidences? Actionable sabotage of the Brian Lara Stadium that was under construction. I won't go into the details as to that. Of inter-island ferries, when you find what they call, I think at the time they called it foreign objects in the engines of the inter-island ferries. In other words, like throwing bolts into the engines to make them, sabotage them basically. And of relentless undermining of government in every sphere of public life, and of a relentlessly hostile news media, because they've captured the news media just about, almost entirely. Item number 2, we must not allow ourselves to be ruled by monkeys. Give them no support. Our people must undermine this nigger, sick government from within the ministries and work assiduously in collecting and disseminating information to our personnel. So what are the evidences of this policy? A minister makes a deposit in a state-owned bank. It is headline news the next day. A Venezuela jet lands during the lockdown. This was during the time of COVID. The passenger manifest is in the paper the next day, giving information that it is quite illegal for ministry personnel to make public, and there are other elements of that. Right? Give them no support, undermine the government at every turn. Item number 3 of the policy. Hire niggers only if you have to make them your slaves. That's their word. And keep them at the lowest level of your payroll. Economic power is ours. What are the evidences? Let each consider when Negro people stand when working for Indo businesses or even state-owned businesses, because even with state-owned businesses, there sometimes comes a point when they become the ones responsible for hiring. So Petro Trin came to be called Petro Singh. First Commercial Bank, FCB, even though it was originally established by mostly Negro people, came to be dominated by them. And now once they dominate and control of hiring, then the whole rest becomes Indian. Item number 4, teach our people how to tip the scales. I won't go into evidences of that. Take your time and read them. Item number 5, our doctors must look out for each other and the interns. Assist our interns in their exams. Remember, exams are not important, but certification is. We must continue the practice. Continue the practice. That means it's the practice that was established earlier by them, of tubal ligation on niggers after the birth of their monkeys, and put little effort into neonatal care. Keep them in the minority. Evidences, an otherwise inexplicable botched cesarean operation where the head of the unborn baby was sliced open. The word continue used here is smoking gun evidence of racially motivated malpractice. Qualified Negro candidates were systematically denied admission to the UWI Medical School. And that was spoken out against by one Professor Bartholomew, who had been a founding professor there of the UWI Medical School. But after the Indians got into the sort of driver's seat, so to say, he complained bitterly of the kind of discriminatory practices that they instituted. And I understand, I speak here now as a Trinidadian, but I read somewhere some time ago that essentially they did the same in South Africa at the University of KwaZulu Natal. So those who are there in South Africa can consider the matter as it pertains to them. Does it tally with what they're familiar with? And there is an organization I think called GOPIO, Global Organization of People of Indian Origin. So it would not be at all a surprise to find that this kind of policy is, whether sub rosa or out in the open, is pursued by them wherever they have been scattered. I have a sister-in-law who is a Negro out of Guyana, and she said, look, the same is happened in Guyana. Item number 6, education is the key to success. So our teachers must focus their attention on our children and forget the rest. Under the Independence and Republican Constitution, this is supposed to be a land where every creed and race find an equal place. If you go into a public school and you've got Indian school teachers focusing their attention on Indian children and forgetting the rest, well, this is a clear violation of that social contract, isn't it? Here what it also says, get involved in correcting examination papers because you can make a difference there. And look at the word AWA, emphasize SEA. SEA is a secondary education assessment, which is used for placing 11 plus students into secondary schools. So this is sort of gateway to prestige schools, so to say. So they're saying our SEA papers correcting groups are very strong and have been working quite well. We must keep this up in order to maintain top placement and scholarships. And here's another line. Remember to keep UWI, University of the West Indies, under close watch. What are the evidences? Complete Indo-domination of SEA results and of placements in prestige schools to the point of statistical impossibility. 1,000,000,000 kinds of odds, moreover, year into cumulative year. Right? Absent cheating. So they've been cheating in that. Item number 9, Indians need to continue infiltrating, that's their word, the protective services. Item number 10, we must take Tobago, buy their properties and make them renters. We know the value of land, and this investment will ensure our political control of the island. And I can speak as one who my family line here came from the United States. At the time of the 1812 war, we came and established what were called the company villages. We were given grant of land and freedom at a time when there was still slavery practice on the island. But we had fought with the British against the Americans, took very active part in the Battle of Bladensburg, which turned out to be a rout, and the American forces fled from that battlefield largely because of the Negro Corps of Colonial Marines, which was part of that enterprise. And we went on to be the party that put a torch to Washington, D.C., including the White House. And I have my own forebear that was given a reward of 1 pound, 4 shillings, and 1 pence for his part in that action. Well, we don't have title to that land anymore. That land is all gone. Okay, I do have some relations who still are on the land. If there's any people that to still have possession of that land, you have to stay on the land. But if you went out to say work anywhere else on the island, in my case, my grandfather was a school principal, and he was posted here, there, and everywhere. So he still had some contact, or in terms of documents and title and etc. to land. But after he died, and my father also died, my two elder brothers that were looking for the documents and titles and so forth, they went to what's called the Red House, which is a big administrative building in Port of Spain, where those title deeds would have been kept. And they're not there. That part of the building had been burnt down. So the company villages had become a sort of a magnet for all those who wanted to come, and sort of like taking candy from a baby sort of situation. Okay? So whether it was the Chinese shopkeepers that came and took advantage of the Negro there, because if you don't have cash, and you wanted to get something from the Chinese shop, yes, they would advance you it, but guess what? You had to sign away a title to your property in case you didn't pay. So a lot of land was lost that way. A lot of land was lost in other ways also, which are, if you went away for a little bit and you come back, you find somebody squatting on your land. And if you go now to try to bring out the documents that prove that it's your land, you can't produce documents. So eventually all that land was lost, except for those few who remained on the land and never left it. And item number 11. So we are superior to them, and they must know it. Now, I'm not as to them having a policy of taking the land. I'm not. I'm advancing the story of my own family case to make the point that we were under the curses. Okay, and under the curses, it says, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 43, it says, even the stranger in your midst would rise up high above you. They would become the head and you would become the tail. So whether you had been given title to land or not, in the end, you couldn't keep it, because the Most High set it up that way for as long as we were under the curses. You understand? Item number 11, we are superior to them, and they must know it. So F.E.M. Hussein, way back in 1925, okay, as part of the East Indian National Congress, had already given the sort of general mens rea this idea that they would be almost destined to take over the island in the field, in the shop, and in the office. And boasting, in effect, that they'd already done it in the island of Mauritius. So they were doing it here in Trinidad. They did it in Guyana. They've taken over in Guyana. Suriname, which is Dutch, but the same dynamics were there as well. South Africa, I'm sure the South Africans have much to say. Again, the story of the university there in KwaZulu-Natal. Uganda, I don't have to sort of remind people of what Idi Amin seemed to have felt constrained to do because of how the Indians there were behaving. Kenya, I'm sure, I don't know any details as to that. And other places in Africa where the Indians have gone. And Fiji, again, I don't have to remind people that I remember seeing that video when there was that attempted coup being led by one George Speight. And this is after an Indian party had basically taken over the government there in Fiji. And he just lost it. And he would know why. You know, because they came in there as indentured laborers, same as they came here to Trinidad. Okay. The local people there, the Fijian sort of indigenous Fijian people, they too are Negro. They didn't come out of Africa, but they're Negro, meaning to say that they were Israelite of the seed. I've been guided there of the tribe of Benjamin. Not Benjamin, Reuben. So they too are under the curses. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 43, even the stranger in your midst will rise up high above you, and you shall come down very low. So this happened in Fiji. And they did it through the ballot box. Well, we just had news here in Trinidad again that some may remember back in that 2015 campaign, some of what had come out was that that UNC, successor party to the Eastern National Congress, had worked with I think a company called Cambridge Analytica, if my memory is correct. I was confused whether it was Cambridge Analytica or Oxford Analytica, anyway, one of those two. And used information that they ought not to have used from the telephone service rules and so forth, so that they could use operations research type techniques, which I know a bit about because I have a doctorate in that subject, to do targeted kind of campaigning, electoral campaigning. You can't, there's nothing wrong with them, using computers and mathematical models and so forth to sort of maximize the sort of, electoral bang they get for the electoral buck that they put into it. But now if you're using information lists that really they were not supposed to be using because it's private information, taken now from state enterprises, that because they had control over the government at the time, they could access that information. And they're not supposed to do that. And that came out in during the course of that particular election campaign. Well, now just recently, we have another election year coming up soon, I think in 2025. And we just recently heard about a data breach at TSTT, Trinidad and Tobago Telecommunication Services of Trinidad and Tobago. They're the ones that handle the partially government-owned cell phone type services in the country. One of them, anyway. Okay, so it was a hacking job. Well, there are only a few dozen people at the most who have the capability of doing that kind of hacking. And it was supposedly to obtain a ransom, from the company, but ransoms are not paid for that kind of thing. Otherwise, there'd be no end of the hacking. And there's no foreign entity that is interested in the personal information, of that sort here in Trinidad, except the same kind of people that were there in that previous election campaign that used Cambridge Analytica to do that sort of thing. So you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to sort of form the hypothesis, if not the conclusion, that they're the ones behind it. You understand? So this sort of thing is going on. So when I say this is a notice and warning to brown Esau, and in particular the Indian diaspora around the world, because I'm sure they're doing the same everywhere, with the same sort of, as I said, they have an organization called GOPIO, Global Organization of People of Indian Origin. So if they're doing it in one place, they're sharing notes and they're doing it in other places. And certainly there have been, similar kinds of outcomes and results and objections and flashpoints wherever they have been. Well, this is what defines the heathen. The heathen nations are those nations, by definition, when you go back to the original Hebrew word, that go into other lands that do not belong to them, to rape, to pillage, to plunder, to enslave the other people of those lands to which they go. So this is the colonial enterprise by definition. So whether you are white Esau or whether you are brown Esau, it is the behavior that matters. And that behavior will attract fiery indignation of the Most High. Fiery indignation. So this notice and warning to brown Esau and the global Indian diaspora is to let them know that the time of Esau is up. Esau was given the dominion for a time and times and a half a time. And the beginning of the end of that dominion was December 31st, 2021. And the Most High uses his servants and is using me as a servant to now speak into existence, speak into manifestation the retribution that he promises. Because he said as to his people, which is still the Negro, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he who blesses thee shall be blessed, and he who curses thee shall be cursed. So he is taking note of all those heathen nations, principally, obviously, the white Esau that were part of the colonial enterprise. Their time is up. In the very first upload on this channel, he had me to write a letter or to issue an audio letter. He didn't write it. An audio letter of demand upon the Catholic Church and upon the so-called State of Israel, the 1948 State of Israel. And in the course of that audio letter, he had me to say that it was in the nature of an eviction notice so far as the State of Israel was concerned. And it was a notice, meaning to say that if they admitted fault, that they were indeed impostors, had no right to that land. And if indeed they repented that which they have done to try to take that land, which they have no right to and ought not even to try, and then he also let me to know, subsequent to that, that the Khazar Jews are today those people called the Amalekites, and they are marked for destruction. But the point is, he has his servants to now speak into existence that which already was prophesied. But you see, we need to come back to him. We need to repent our own sins, which is what I have been doing, which is what, as we, the Negro, have woken up, many of us, to who we are. and acknowledge the sins of our forefathers and our own sins, yes, now he says he will hear our prayer. He will hear our prayer and uphold our cause, and indeed fulfill that which was prophesied a long time ago, that he would give us that dominion that was ours to begin with. He would end the sort of temporary dominion that he allowed Esau to enjoy, including brown Esau. And then he would put upon them who have harmed our people, who have cursed our people, who have made us to labor and taken no account of our labors, who have stolen our land, stolen title to our land in some cases. He will put curses on those who have harmed his people. So this is what this nature, this is what this notice and warning are about. To let brown Esau know that their behavior is that of the heathen. Their behavior is no different from the colonial powers. And the fact that they are brown, and the fact that they like to pose themselves as being of the global South, is not going to change, what the indignation that the Most High feels as to the kind of behavior that I've just been now outlining here. With what F.E.M. Hussein said way back in the 1920s, and what that Indian policy document is saying, and where there's clear evidence that they have been implementing that policy. This is totally unacceptable. So either, and this is by nature of a warning and of a notice, which means that you still have, and I say you, the Indian, and there are other brown Esau people, not all of them are Indian, but the Indians are the main ones. To the extent they've carried this animus against the Negro, to the kinds of lengths that we see here evidenced in that Indian policy and actual works that support the existence of that policy. If there is admittance of fault and repentance of fault, and it was the same thing he had me to say to that modern state of Israel, then yes, they still have a price to pay, but the Most High can moderate the price that is paid. Okay, and we see here now the eviction of that modern state of Israel is ongoing as we speak. I don't think they quite recognize it yet, but all what they are doing in terms of the genocide being perpetrated upon the people of Gaza, all of that is sort of prelude to the eviction of those people that will surely come. And he also had led me to give an upload. I think it was entitled NATO's Nakedness is Exposed. This was in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, and that indeed is now being made manifest as we speak, because the Russians have clearly won on the battlefield in that what they call special military operation, and NATO has got nothing that they can now throw against Russia. NATO's nakedness was exposed. Okay, he had me to do an upload on Russia being the king of the South. This was long before anybody was calling Russia as being head of the global south. But this is now what Russia has become sort of, head of the global south. We saw it clearly when there was that coup in Niger and before Niger in Burkina Faso and so forth. The Negro in Africa finally getting rid of the French colonial usurper there, okay, and the people are waving Russian flags, sort of, in effect paying a particular regard and respect to Brother Putin. Because Brother Putin, he also had me to say, speak into existence, is the fulfillment of that prophecy of Obadiah verse 18, which says, and Jacob shall be a flame. Jacob shall be a fire, and Joseph a flame, and Esau for stubble. Where that Joseph is Russia, Brother Putin. And Esau there is in the, at least to begin with, the United States and its NATO allies there that were trying to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia, and have not at all weakened Russia. In fact, they've strengthened Russia. So that was also spoken into existence. He also had me to do an audio lecture at the time of the death of Elizabeth II, making the simple point that line, which for claims legitimacy based on ancestral link back to the throne of David. He let me to know that link was long ago broken, because it came through a surviving daughter. The last king of Judah was one Zedekiah, and all of his sons were killed in front of his face. And then his eyes were gouged out. But there was a provision in Israelite law that allowed a female to inherit, but on the condition that she had to marry within the tribe. So she had to stay within the tribe of Judah. And that female heir was named Tefi, and she went with Prophet Jeremiah over to the British Isles, in fact to Ireland. And there she married a prince, or was it a king? He may already have been a king, Yoked of Ireland, who was a Negro of the tribe of Judah, of the Zahite line, because the British Isles were first populated by Negro people. Okay, over time Esau went there, okay, and basically ethnically cleansed the Negro out. They did it in Ireland, so there used to be black Irish, they're not there anymore. There used to be black Scots, black Welsh, they're not there anymore. The Celts and the Gauls were originally all Negro people there in Western Europe. Well, Esau came and gradually erased them from that land. So that the royal line that went through Tefi, that the male part of that equation, at some point that line back to David was interrupted, and Esau became part of that line. Matter of fact, the Most High let me to know that the father of King James, sixth of Scotland, first of England, the one who commissioned the Bible that is named after him, he in fact was Edomite, even though he was a mulatto, mixed. He looked mixed. When you see his portrait, his father, Lord Darnley, in fact was Edomite of seed. And that Edomite male line has come down to, well, it became even worse, because you also had William and Mary coming over from the Netherlands. And now you have this latest one there, which is the Battenberg family. so that Charles, his father was Prince Philip, who is of the house of Battenberg, as it's called, or Saxe-Gotha, goes back to a German line, but that line is a Edomite line. Well, if he Edomite, that violates the condition under which the inheritance could continue to pass down from the original one who left it, who was King David, through Zedekiah, of course. So Charles can no longer claim legitimacy going back to the throne of David. So he had me to give a notice as to that, to those current and heads of state and government of the British Commonwealth, to decide whether they wanted to continue to have, Charles as being their sort of head of state, if not head of state, head of the Commonwealth. And he also had me to issue a letter to all colonized and formerly colonized peoples, their current and former rulers, essentially saying that the time of their redemption is at hand, because Esau's time is now essentially up. Well, so this is now why there is need for a letter, audio letter in this case here now, to brown Esau, and in specific the Indian diaspora wherever scattered around the world, because they certainly can claim to having been a colonized people. Okay, so yes, in a sense, the time of their redemption is at hand. But if they are brown Esau, and if they have been part of Babylon, in effect, if they have been part of the heathen enterprise of colonial pillage and plunder, but now continuing in a new devilish sort of way that I have now described, at least as to Trinidad, it needs to be made clear that no, they're not getting any kind of redemption. That doesn't apply to them. You understand? So this is why this notice of warning is required, specifically for brown Esau. And also because when you look around the world, you can see Esau is sort of on the ascendancy, brown Esau that is, because there's one in the number 10 Downing Street, Rishi Sunak. Okay, we have what's his name, Vivek Ramaswamy there, trying to become a president here in the there in the United States. You have another one, Ro Khanna, who wants to be a senator, this and that. You have, there's so many of them now. And of course, they're in South Africa. They want to sort of, slide in as being brown of skin. But if their behavior there in South Africa is what it has been here in Trinidad, no, that is not going to fly. Okay, I see the president of Uganda there has taken to singling them out and calling them Basakulu, the Basakulu people, and I don't have a problem with him trying to be inclusive and as such. But if they are working a plan and working a program there in Uganda, as they're working here in Trinidad, as clearly they seem to have worked in Fiji, as clearly they have already completely taken over Mauritius. Mauritius is now lost to any Negro that were there. And in other places, the Most High is saying no. Just because you're brown of skin, and just because you claim to be of the global South, no, the behavior is what matters. And he's looking at the behavior such as I have described with fierce indignation. And the hammer is going to fall on brown Esau just as hard as on white Esau, unless there is admittance of sin, repentance of sin. And so that is the message that I have been tasked to bring today. There's more I wanted to say, but I could sort of, but I will stop there and give all praise, all glory, all exaltation unto the Most High God, Yehovah, and to all listening, and certainly who are of our people, the Negro people, who indeed can now look forward to a redemption. I say shalom.